4 years after Brexit, Great Britain appears disillusioned. Less growth, a lack of trade agreements, and rising prices are just some of the consequences. And 4 years after officially leaving the European Union, Great Britain is faced with sobering consequences of Brexit, as reported here in Germany lately a lot. Instead of the hope for economic recovery, falling growth, a lack of trade agreements, and rising food costs are the order of the day. Proponents of Brexit, including then Prime Minister Boris Johnson, promised the population sovereignty and profitable trade deals outside the EU. You will remember the slogan, "Take back control." They said bilateral agreements with better conditions would replace the previous EU trade agreements. But given the current situation, this optimism seems far away. On the 4th anniversary of Brexit, the failure of free trade talks between Great Britain and Canada had to be reported. You might have seen my video on that one. The number of trade agreements concluded is also disappointing. After Canada imposed high import tariffs on cheese and cars, the United Kingdom has only concluded bilateral trade agreements with Australia and New Zealand and joined the Pacific Pact, CPTPP. There may be some advantages from the agreements, but these countries are all far away. The government itself estimates each contract to be worth 0.1% of gross domestic product. This in no way compensates for the losses caused by the loss of access to the EU internal market. That was explained by Thomas Sampson. He's an economist at the London School of Economics. Food price increases and immigration records are further exacerbating post-Brexit problems. Border controls on food imports from the EU, which have now finally come into force, increase bureaucratic burdens and import costs, which will lead to price increases. In 2022, net immigration reached a new high of 745,000 people, well above the Conservative government's target of 212,000 immigrants per year. And the results 4 years after Brexit are therefore sobering. Polls show that 63% of Brits rate Brexit as a failure, while only 12% see it as a success. And entrepreneur Richard Walker, head of the British discount supermarket chain Iceland and a Brexit supporter at the time, sees it similarly. The opportunities presented by Brexit have simply not been used. The result is ridiculous, he says. Less growth, the promised trade agreements have still not been concluded, and there are many new controls. 4 years after leaving the EU, many Brits are struggling with Brexit. At the time, Brexit supporters never tired of praising Britain's guaranteed sovereignty outside the EU, like then Prime Minister Boris Johnson. I said it before, but take back control really shows more. The idea was to replace the EU's trade agreements around the world with bilateral agreements with better conditions. But just in time, we now see that they have tons of rollover, or what I call copy and paste trade deals, and that are even partly running out now, or have run out. And after the EU rules fell after a transition period, Canada did indeed impose high import tariffs on cheese and cars. And the trade agreements that are still in place, they left about 800 agreements. You must not forget this. And what they have now is just ridiculous compared to what they had. According to Sampson, it is of course difficult to quantify the economic losses caused by Brexit precisely. According to models, they are in the range of 3 to 5% of gross domestic product, so the 4% of the ONS would be right in the middle. You have to imagine it like a small hole in a car tire that the economy is slowly running out of air, says Sampson. It has grown a little less since the referendum than would have been expected without Brexit. Investments have declined due to Brexit uncertainty, and overall gross domestic product has fallen. And the British have to take another bad message from the news on the Brexit anniversary. The prices for fruit and vegetables, but also dairy and meat products, will rise over the course of the year because previously postponed border controls for food imports from the EU are now actually coming into force, and they will increase bureaucratic effort and import costs. The industry associations expect additional costs of around 230 million euros per year. And in addition, there was this immigration racket in 22. The Brexit promise that fewer people would come to the British island after the end of EU freedom of movement was also not fulfilled. And as I said, the 745,000 people last year are not even close to what was promised. And so who still wants to believe this government? But that's why their poll numbers are as bad as they are. The government has now reacted with bans on immigration, and Samson sees this less as an economic issue than as a political one. The issue is not primarily about the economic consequences of increased immigration, because that is a lot of workers. Rather, it is politically charged. But what does desirable immigration look like? Surveys from last year show that almost 2/3, namely 63% of Brits, are of the opinion that Brexit was not a success and only 12% see a success. However, 70% agree that the government has botched the implementation. And so they are in the same range as Walker. They still believe there would have been big possibilities. Just to be frank, they have never been there. But Walker doesn't regret Brexit. He wants to see the opportunities to be fulfilled. But that is still ridiculous, and not only the result as he says. But as I said, we are now 4 years after they finally left the EU. And the implementation of Brexit has so far come in spurts, meaning ever new uncertainties for trades in the future. And this still falls short of what was promised when leaving the EU. Instead, intra-EU exports are flourishing while British goods heading to Europe are on the decline, and at the same time the efforts for retailers is growing. And when, for example, the day comes at the new Covent Garden market in London, wholesalers of vegetables and plants might soon be off work. But it's not just the night shifts that exhaust many of them, but also 4 years of Brexit and its customs forms. Since January 31st, new customs rule apply to plants and animal products, for example, which entail more bureaucracy. And from April, there will be additional physical checks by veterinarians and food inspectors. The new customs regime is likely to cost the country and companies the equivalent of around 385 million euros, according to the British government itself. And rising costs are what retailers will pass on to consumers. And half of everything Brits eat is imported, 2/3 of it from the EU, as data from the Food Standards Agency shows. But Brexit is also challenging the patience of those who deliver to the British Isles. A florist from the Netherlands expects 59 bureaucratic obstacles for the Dutch petunia to enter British trade. It is questionable whether the plant will survive such a long tour. And this is what they fear the most at the London wholesale market. Delays when trucks are loaded with products of different risk classes. That means have different control requirements. Nathan Humphreys from French Gardens imports vegetables from France and sells them to his British customers. Spontaneously ordering 10 boxes of vegetables in Paris and picking them up the next morning is no longer possible. Now we have to explain to the customs authorities what is going on the truck. The whole process slows down, says Humphreys. And some European companies have stated to bypass British wholesalers, said Freddie Heathcote from wholesalers Green and Bloom. Brexit has no advantage for Heathcote. They are also frustrated at the Food Trade Association Provision Trade Federation. Brexit requires meticulous work, says Director General Rod Eddy. It takes huge amounts of staff, not just in government, but also in industry, because it's all such complex stuff. By the end of 2023, all laws that came about under the influence of EU rules were supposed to be renewed or discarded as well. A mammoth task for the administrations, and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was forced to drop the self-imposed deadline of 2023. And according to an assessment by the Open University, 67% of these laws are still unchanged. And another unachieved Brexit goal is the trade agreements with countries outside the EU that should account for 80% of all businesses after Brexit. And they missed that again. The British economics minister recently blamed US President Biden for this. His government has so far not been ready for an agreement. But you know that negotiations with Canada have also been put on hold. Politically, Brexit is kind of a taboo in the year of the election in Great Britain. Election campaigners will prefer to keep it quiet, and Brexit opponents will not demand re-entry into the EU. And for years after Brexit, there's a paralyzed political debate and a lame economy. And if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there.